Leave now or I'll call the police. My son's voice ripped through the humid Georgia night like a gunshot, and for a moment I stood frozen on the cracked front porch, my fingers clenched so tightly around the manila folder that the edges bit into my palm. My name is Gloria Jefferson, 68 years old, a retired school accountant who has lived by ledgers, numbers, and discipline my whole life. That house behind him, with its sagging gutters and magnolia tree leaning against the side fence, was not just wood and brick. It was the foundation of my sacrifices, the one place my late husband and I built dollar by dollar over 3 decades. And yet, as Marcus, my only son, glared at me with the fury of a stranger, I realized in one blistering second that he was willing to throw me out like a trespasser. The porch light buzzed overhead, moths circling, and in the street, a neighbor's blinds shifted curious eyes peeking through. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, while Vanessa, my son's wife, leaned against the doorway with a smirk tugging at her lips, her cell phone glowing in her manicured hand like a weapon she was eager to use. "You heard him," she said, her voice laced with mockery. "This isn't your business anymore, Gloria. You're not even on the deed." My chest tightened until it felt like a vice, but I held up the folder between us, shaking just enough to betray my age, not my resolve. "This," I said, "is my business. These are bank statements, withdrawal slips, and the home equity line of credit you two opened in my name. You mortgaged this house for your gambling debts. Vanessa and Marcus you signed because you thought I'd never notice." For a flicker of a second, I expected shame. Maybe denial, maybe even a crack in my son's hard mask. Instead, he stepped closer, towering his hand, gripping the door frame as if he might slam it shut on me forever. "Old paper doesn't mean anything," he spat. "What matters is right now, and right now this is our house. If you don't leave, I will call the cops and have you dragged off this porch." The words cut deeper than any slap, and though my knees trembled, something inside me hardened. I thought of the long nights balancing budgets at the school office, the years of coupon clipping the way I had patched hand-me-downs so Marcus could walk into school with pride. I thought of my husband Henry's calloused hands laying every tile in that kitchen, saying, "This will be our foundation, Gloria, for Marcus for the future." And now, that foundation was being gambled away, hand over fist, reduced to chips on a casino table glowing on Vanessa's phone. The folder in my hand slipped slightly as sweat slicked my fingers. Marcus's voice roared again. "Do you want me to call right now?" The porch light flickered, the cicadas droned, and my heart pounded against my ribs. My son, my blood, had chosen betrayal over truth. I could have begged, could have pleaded for him to remember the woman who had sacrificed everything. But begging never fixed numbers on a balance sheet, and it would not fix this. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the folder, slid it back under my arm, and took a single step backward. "Call them if you want." I whispered, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "But tomorrow morning the papers won't come from the police. They'll come from the court." Vanessa's smirk faltered just for a heartbeat, and Marcus blinked confusion flickering across his face. But I didn't give them the satisfaction of another word. I turned, walked down the porch steps into the heavy night air, the smell of cut grass and asphalt thick in my nose, and unlocked my car with trembling hands. The manila folder slid onto the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. My reflection in the window looked older, more worn, but sharper too, like steel tempered in flame. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the number I had tucked away for months, and pressed call. The line rang once, then twice, before a warm, steady voice answered. "This is Brenda Lee." I closed my eyes, exhaled the weight of 30 years, and said the words I never thought I would. "Brenda, it's time to list the house." The silence on the other end was brief but heavy. Then Brenda's voice came back calm and sure. "All right, Gloria, we'll handle it." As I ended the call, the reality crashed over me. Not police sirens, not family reconciliation, but the sound of my own decision echoing louder than any threat my son could throw. I had been thrown out of my own foundation, but tomorrow I would reclaim it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of my small apartment, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in my chest. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold, staring at the folder of papers that felt heavier than any textbook I'd ever balanced in my 30 years as a school accountant. Last night had drawn a line I could no longer step back across. My son Marcus had looked me in the eye and treated me like a trespasser in the house I had spent a lifetime paying for. And Vanessa, his wife, had stood beside him like a queen, smugly guarding her throne. To understand how we had reached this place, you need to know them. Marcus Jefferson, my only child, 42 years old. As a boy, he had been lanky, wide-eyed, the kind of kid who begged for extra stories at night and cried when I left him at preschool. But somewhere between high school and adulthood, Marcus learned to love shortcuts more than effort. He hated saving, hated waiting, hated hearing no. When he started selling cars in his 20s, he bragged about commissions and flashy bonuses. He always had a new watch or shoes, even when his credit card statements came in thick envelopes. I told him once, son, debt is a hole. It's easy to dig, but hard to climb out. He laughed, waved me off. Mom, everybody has debt. It's just how you live. Vanessa Reed Jefferson was different. Or maybe she was the accelerant poured on an already smoldering fire. 38 sharp cheekbones, acrylic nails clicking against her phone as if her thumbs had never known real work. She worked part-time as a makeup artist when Marcus first introduced her, but by the time they married, she had a taste for late-night poker apps and weekend trips to Cherokee Casino. She didn't even bother to hide it. The first time I caught her, she was in my kitchen, tapping frantically at a slot machine app, muttering curses under her breath while my grandbaby sat ignored in a high chair. When I confronted her, she sneered, "Relax, Gloria. Everyone plays a little. It's entertainment." But the bank statements told another story. Thousands drained in quick transfers, credit cards maxed, and Marcus right there signing his name as if the money tree grew in my backyard. The worst part wasn't just the money. It was the way Marcus let her talk for him, as if her voice had become his own. Last night had proved it. When I raised the HELOC papers, Vanessa laughed in my face, saying, "This house is ours, Gloria. You should be thanking us for keeping it alive." Marcus didn't defend me. He didn't defend the years of double shifts, the thrift store clothes, the foundation his father and I built. He folded his arms and let her words speak for him. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. The boy I had carried, fed, prayed for was now an accomplice to the woman bleeding our family dry. And what cut deepest was how they wore arrogance like armor. Marcus truly believed I was powerless, too old, too tired, too out of touch to fight back. Vanessa believed her smirk could erase my name from the mortgage and my sweat from the floorboards. But paper does not lie, and foundations do not crumble because someone wishes them away. That morning, I closed the folder, squared my shoulders, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "You think I'm powerless? Watch me." That afternoon, I spread the folder across my kitchen table like a crime scene investigator pinning down evidence, and in a way that was exactly what I was doing. Every page was a fingerprint of betrayal. Every statement a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to Marcus and Vanessa. The first stack was the home equity line of credit HELOC, 3 bold letters that had haunted me since the envelope arrived 6 weeks ago. Balance, $74, $200. The interest rate, 9.25% variable. I had never signed those papers yet. My name sat neatly on the line marked co-signer. I stared at the signature and felt bile rise in my throat. It was my name, but the slant was wrong, the flourish forced. I could tell in a heartbeat it wasn't mine. Forgery clear as day. I dug further. The next set was credit card statements Marcus's account, but with charges that screamed Vanessa. A weekend in Cherokee, $1, $800 at Harrah's Casino. Transfers to online poker platforms, each labeled with anonymous codes, but easy to decode once you saw the pattern. April 16th, $500 withdrawal. April 19th, $750. April 22nd, $1, $200. Over and over like clockwork, draining money as fast as I had spent years saving it. I picked up the next piece, a bank withdrawal slip signed in Marcus's scrawl. $5,000 cash out deposited into an account under Vanessa's maiden name. They thought I wouldn't find it. They thought a tired old woman wouldn't know how to log into online banking, wouldn't know how to request certified copies, wouldn't know how to track every dime. But I had balanced budgets for a school district with 2,000 students. I knew how to follow numbers like bloodhounds track scent. Each paper whispered the same story, lies piled on lies, denial dressed up as entitlement. I closed my eyes, and the memory of last night's confrontation came flooding back. I had held up these very pages on the porch light buzzing overhead, my voice cracking as I begged my son to see the truth. Marcus, look, this is your signature. This is her gambling app. You've tied this house to debt that will drown us all. Vanessa had laughed a sharp bark that made my skin crawl. Please, Gloria, anyone could print that. You think a few pieces of paper scare me? The bank knows it's ours. The deed is in our name. She had turned to Marcus, her arm looping possessively through his. Tell her she's crazy. And he had. He had looked me dead in the eye and said, Mom, you don't understand how this works. Equity grows. Debt is leverage. You're stuck in the past. The words had cut like knives. Stuck in the past. The past that had fed him, clothed him, paid for his textbooks, his braces, his first used car. The past that had held together a marriage until cancer stole Henry from me. That past was the only reason he had a roof to call his own. Yet in Marcus's eyes, my proof was meaningless. My sacrifices outdated my warnings. Just noise. I pressed my hand flat against the table. Now the papers cool under my skin, the edges sharp enough to remind me I wasn't imagining things. I saw the late fees piling the risk of foreclosure if payments weren't made. I saw the bank notices stamped in red delinquent. Final warning. And still I heard Vanessa's mocking voice echoing, "This is our house now." I pushed the papers into neat piles, my old accountant habits returning like armor. Columns rose categories. HELOC fraud, gambling expenditures, unauthorized withdrawals, each one a weapon, each one a nail in the coffin of their lies. They thought denial could erase numbers. But numbers like foundations don't lie. I leaned back in my chair, my body weary, but my mind sharpening. These weren't just documents. They were the blueprint of my fight. They were the bricks I would stack to build the case that would crush their arrogance. My son and his wife believed I was powerless because they lived in a world of excuses and instant gratification. But I had lived in the world of accountability where every cent had to be justified and every ledger balanced. They had their voices, their threats, their laughter. I had this folder, and I knew which one the court would believe. 2 evenings later, I drove back to the house I once called my sanctuary folder, clutched against my chest like a shield. The air was thick with the scent of fried chicken from a neighbor's kitchen and the low hum of lawnmowers finishing their work for the day. I walked up the walkway I had edged myself years ago, past the magnolia tree Henry planted, my steps echoing on the cracked stone path. My heart beat hard against my ribs, but my resolve was steady. Tonight, I wasn't coming to beg. I was coming to confront. The front door opened before I could even knock. Marcus stood there, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched, and behind him, Vanessa lounged on the couch with a glass of red wine, the television flickering over her smirk. "What now, Mom?" Marcus asked, his tone sharp, impatient. I lifted the folder, my knuckles white against the edges. "What now is that I have proof. You forged my name, Marcus. You signed me into debt I never agreed to. This isn't just reckless, it's criminal." I stepped forward, trying to place the papers in his hand, but he recoiled as if they were poison. Vanessa's laugh carried across the room, loud enough for the neighbors on their porches to hear. "Oh, Gloria, still clinging to your little papers. You think a judge is going to side with you because you scribbled some printouts from the bank." She tilted her wine glass and added, "Face it, you're old. You don't get how things work anymore." My cheeks burned not just from her words, but from the eyes I felt on me. Curtains shifting, neighbors pausing their conversations. They could hear the raised voices, maybe even catch bits of the humiliation spilling out of my own doorway. Marcus crossed his arms, his stance wide and immovable. "Mom, we've told you. This house is ours. The deed is in our names. Stop embarrassing yourself in front of everybody." The folder trembled in my hands, the papers rattling like dry leaves. I forced my voice steady. I paid for this house, Marcus. 30 years of sacrifice. You wouldn't have a deed to sign without me. And this, I pulled out the HELOC statement and waved it between us. This shows you've tied our foundation to Vanessa's gambling. You're sinking everything we built. Vanessa rose from the couch, striding to the doorway, her heels clicking against the hardwood Henry had laid with his own hands. She shoved Marcus aside gently, then stepped nose to nose with me. Her perfume was sharp cloying as she hissed, "Get off our porch before I make that call. You want the neighbors to see you hauled off in handcuffs? That's what's next if you don't leave." My throat tightened, the humiliation a bitter taste in my mouth. I glanced at Marcus, searching his face for any trace of the boy I once knew. The boy who cried when his dog died, the boy who promised he'd always take care of me. But his eyes were hard blank, unmoved. He reached for his phone thumb hovering over the screen. "Mom," he said coldly. "Last warning." I looked at the papers in my hands, the proof that they were liars, gamblers, betrayers. But on that porch, under the buzzing light, none of it mattered. They had the house, the deed, the arrogance. All I had was truth. And truth wasn't welcome here. Slowly, I tucked the papers back into the folder, held it tight against my chest, and took one step backward, then another. Vanessa laughed again, her voice slicing through the heavy night air. "That's right. Walk away, Gloria. Go back to your little apartment. This is ours now." The neighbors' blinds shifted again, and I felt their silent pity like needles in my back. But as I reached my car and slid into the driver's seat, the shame gave way to something sharper. If Marcus and Vanessa thought I was beaten, they were wrong. They mistook silence for surrender. But silence can also be strategy, and mine was about to speak louder than all their lies. I drove home that night with the folder still on the passenger seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The hurt clung to me like a second skin, but underneath it was a rising tide of memories that refused to be silenced. That house wasn't just four walls. It was the vessel of a lifetime, a monument to sacrifices that no one but me seemed to remember anymore. I was 24 when Henry and I scraped together the down payment. He was working construction, then pouring concrete by day and doing handyman jobs by night, while I worked full-time as a junior accountant at the public school district. We saved every dime cut, every corner. I packed lunches instead of buying cafeteria food-clipped coupons until my fingers were ink-stained, and turned down family trips because the mortgage came first. I remember one Christmas when Marcus was 10. He wanted a pair of brand-name sneakers all the boys at school were wearing. We couldn't afford them, not with the new roof leaking in 3 places. Henry and I stayed up late patching shingles in the cold while Marcus cried himself to sleep. The next morning, I handed him a pair of off-brand shoes bought on clearance. His face fell, but I told him, "Son, these shoes will get you just as far. One day you'll thank us." I told myself the house was the thank you, the real gift, the solid foundation he could always stand on. There were nights when the weight of that mortgage pressed down like a millstone. When Henry was diagnosed with lung cancer, I picked up tutoring on weekends just to keep the payments steady while the medical bills piled high. I watched him fade, his once strong frame shrinking under hospital sheets, and every time he squeezed my hand, he whispered, "Don't let go of the house, Gloria. It's our foundation." Those words burned themselves into my bones. I didn't let go. I worked through grief, through exhaustion, through years of being both mother and father to Marcus. I cut corners on myself, wore the same winter coat for 15 years, patched my own shoes, skipped dental appointments. Every dollar saved went into that mortgage. The day I signed the final check clearing it in full, I walked out of the bank with tears streaming down my face. 30 years of labor, and the deed was ours, clean and clear. I remember holding it in my hands, the embossed paper shimmering like gold in the sunlight, and thinking, this is the inheritance Henry and I built. This is Marcus's foundation. Now to hear Vanessa laugh, to see Marcus dismiss those decades as if they were nothing but numbers on a page, felt like having the ground ripped from under me. They hadn't seen the nights I sat at the kitchen table adding columns by lamplight while Marcus slept upstairs. They hadn't seen me stretch meals of beans and rice into feasts so the mortgage never went unpaid. They hadn't seen Henry coughing blood and still insisting on fixing the porch steps so Marcus wouldn't trip. That house was built on sacrifice, layered like brick upon brick. And yet my own son had traded it for casino chips and credit cards, mortgaging not just a building, but every ounce of sweat we had poured into it. As I sat in my small apartment, now staring at the peeling linoleum floor, I felt the weight of those memories pressing down. But with the weight came clarity. This wasn't just about money. This was about legacy, about refusing to let 30 years of sacrifice vanish into Vanessa's laughter and Marcus's arrogance. They thought I was too tired, too old, too beaten down to fight. But they were wrong. I hadn't survived decades of sacrifice to lose my foundation now. The morning after that humiliating night on the porch, I rose before dawn, poured myself a cup of bitter coffee, and stared at the manila folder spread across my kitchen table. The papers no longer felt like a burden. They were tools, and tools needed professionals who knew how to use them. At 8 o'clock sharp, I dialed the number I'd saved for months, Brenda Lee, the realtor who had helped a friend of mine downsize last year. Brenda was 55, sharp-eyed, and spoke with the kind of measured calm that made people listen. When she picked up, I could almost see her adjusting her glasses and sitting straighter. "Gloria, I got your message. You ready to talk?" My throat tightened, but I steadied my voice. "Yes, Brenda. It's time. I need to know what this house is really worth if it goes on the market." 30 minutes later, I sat across from her in her neat downtown office, sunlight streaming across polished hardwood floors. She spread a stack of printouts in front of me, charts and graphs I recognized instantly from my own years balancing budgets. "Comparative market analysis," she said. "Your neighborhood's hot right now. Similar houses have closed between $390 and $420 in the last 6 months. With the magnolia tree and the upgrades Henry made, we could push 410, maybe 415 if we find the right buyer." I wrote down the numbers carefully in my notebook. "And the debt." Brenda's eyes softened, but her tone stayed professional. "The mortgage balance plus that $74,000 line of credit your son and daughter-in-law pulled. It's heavy, but there's still equity, enough for you to walk away with something solid if the court forces a sale." The words "forces a sale" hung in the air like a bell tolling. I tucked them into my mind and knew I needed the next professional. From Brenda's office, I drove straight to a law firm recommended by a former colleague. The brass letters on the door read Carter and Willis Attorneys at Law. Inside, shelves of leather-bound books lined the walls, the air smelling faintly of oak and ink. Attorney Denise Carter, 62, greeted me with a handshake firm enough to remind me she had fought battles in courtrooms for decades. We sat in her conference room as I laid out my folder piece by piece, HELOC statements, forged signatures, gambling transfers. Denise listened without interruption, her pen scratching across a yellow legal pad, her silver hair catching the overhead lights. When I finished, she pushed her glasses up her nose and spoke with the precision of someone who knew every inch of the battlefield. "Mrs. Jefferson, you are not powerless here. You are a co-signer on the original mortgage. That means under Georgia law, you retain legal rights. They cannot refinance, borrow further, or dispose of the property without your consent. What they've done already, tying your name to a fraudulent HELOC, violates those rights. You have grounds to file for partition by sale." The phrase sounded heavy final. "Partition by sale," I repeated. Denise nodded. "It's a court-ordered action. When co-owners cannot agree on the use of a property, the court forces a sale. The proceeds are divided according to ownership interest. Given your role as co-signer and financial contributor, you'll be entitled to a portion, possibly a significant one." I thought of Marcus and Vanessa smirking, laughing, threatening me with police. I imagined a sheriff's deputy standing on their porch, handing them papers they couldn't crumple or dismiss. My pulse quickened. What would it take to start? Denise leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Documentation and resolve. You already have the first. Do you have the second?" I straightened in my chair, feeling Henry's words echoing in my bones. "Don't let go of the house, Gloria. It's our foundation." I met her gaze and answered firmly. "Yes. I have both." Denise tapped her pen against the pad, her tone brisk. "Then here's the plan. Step 1, file a lis pendens, a legal notice, to block any transfer or refinancing. Step 2, draft the petition for partition. Step 3, prepare for the inevitable denial, anger, and threats from your son and his wife. But remember, once the papers are filed, this shifts from family argument to legal process. And in that arena, truth and documentation carry the weight. I left her office with my folder tucked neatly under my arm, my heels clicking against the tile floor, each step sounding like a drumbeat of resolve. For the first time in months, I felt the ground solid beneath me. Marcus and Vanessa thought they had silenced me with arrogance, but they had forgotten the oldest rule of all foundations matter. And this time, the foundation of law was on my side. 3 nights later, as the cicadas screamed outside my apartment window, the pounding on my door jolted me upright. It was nearly midnight, too late for a neighbor too sharp and insistent to ignore. My stomach twisted. I knew before I even looked through the peephole who it would be. Marcus stood there in the hallway, his fists clenched, his shoulders heaving. Vanessa hovered beside him, arms crossed, her lips painted blood red and curled into a cruel smile. I opened the door just a crack, the chain still in place. "What do you want?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. Marcus leaned close, his eyes burning. "We know what you're doing. You went to a lawyer, didn't you? You're trying to sell the house out from under us." His words were low but venomous, dripping with accusation. Vanessa shoved past him, her voice shrill enough to pierce the walls. "You think you're smart, Gloria? You think some wrinkled old woman can drag us into court and win? That house is ours. You'll regret even trying." My hands trembled against the chain lock, but I lifted my phone, its red recording light glowing in the dark. "Everything you say," I whispered, "is evidence now." Vanessa's smirk faltered for half a heartbeat before she spat toward the floor. "You don't scare me. I'll tell the judge you're senile, that you don't know what you're signing. Marcus will back me up. We'll bury you in paperwork until you can't breathe." Marcus's jaw tightened, his fists slamming once against the doorframe hard enough to rattle the chain. "Mom, stop this. Drop whatever you filed or you'll regret it. We're not playing games anymore." My heart pounded so loud I thought they could hear it, but I refused to flinch. I lifted the phone higher so the camera caught Marcus's angry face. Vanessa's sneer, the menace in their voices. "Good," I said softly. "Keep talking." Silence hung for a moment, thick and heavy. Vanessa tugged at Marcus's arm. "Come on, she's not worth it." They turned and stalked down the hall, Vanessa's heels clicking against the linoleum, Marcus muttering curses under his breath. I stood there, the chain still latched, the phone still recording my breath coming in shallow gasps. When the sound of their footsteps faded, I closed the door and locked every bolt. My knees nearly gave out, but I pressed my back against the cool wood and forced myself to inhale slowly, then exhale. They thought intimidation would break me. They thought rage would undo decades of discipline. But they didn't understand. I had survived a husband's illness, raised a son on my own, carried mortgages heavier than my body ever should have borne. I knew how to weather storms, and now I had proof, their threats captured in pixel and sound. I whispered into the silence of my apartment, "You've just built my case for me." The following week moved like clockwork, each day marked not by routine, but by steps into a new battlefield. On Monday morning, I sat in Attorney Denise Carter's office again, my folder of evidence neatly stacked between us. Denise adjusted her glasses and slid a thick packet across the polished oak desk. "This is your petition for partition by sale, Gloria. Once we file, the court sets things in motion. From this point on, it's not an argument on a porch, it's a legal proceeding." I took the papers in my hands. The language was heavy with formality, but I understood every word. It named Marcus Jefferson and Vanessa Reed Jefferson as co-defendants. It cited the HELOC, the forged signature, the delinquent payments. It demanded the property be sold with proceeds divided according to the law. The last line rang in my head like a verdict already spoken. Petitioner seeks equitable division and immediate relief from ongoing financial harm. My signature on that packet was firm, deliberate, the pen biting into the paper like a blade carving into stone. Denise stamped it with authority. "We'll file today. Fulton County Clerk's office will docket it by tomorrow morning." By Wednesday, Denise called with an update. "The lice pendens is in place. That means your son and his wife can't sell, refinance, or touch the property until the case is resolved." I exhaled a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. For the first time in months, the house was protected not by sentiment, but by the weight of the law. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on Marcus and Vanessa's door. I wasn't there, but Denise told me the scene. The deputy in his pressed uniform and polished boots handed Marcus a thick envelope stamped with the court's seal. Marcus had laughed at first, tossing it onto the counter like junk mail. But Vanessa, curious, ripped it open, her eyes scanning the first page. Her laughter died, replaced with a sharp intake of breath. She shoved the papers into Marcus's chest, her voice shrill. "She's suing us! Do you understand what this means? She's taking us to court." Neighbors saw it too. Word traveled fast. By that evening, I got a call from Mrs. Thompson down the block. "Gloria, honey, I saw that deputy on Marcus's porch. You do what you have to do. We've all watched how they've treated you. About time someone set it straight." The following week, Marcus called me. His voice was a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You really dragged us into court like we're criminals." I held the phone steady, my voice calm. "I didn't drag you anywhere, Marcus. You walked yourself there when you forged my name and gambled away our foundation. The court will sort the rest." He swore at me words I won't repeat before slamming the line dead. But I didn't cry. Instead, I pressed save on the voicemail. Another piece of evidence. Denise prepared me for what came next. They'll deny everything. They'll try to paint you as confused, unstable, too old to know what you're signing. But don't worry, we have the documents, the recordings, the bank statements. Evidence never blinks, Gloria. The first hearing date arrived. I sat in a courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, the wooden pews creaking as people shifted. Marcus and Vanessa walked in together, dressed as if they were attending church, their expressions a mix of arrogance and fear. Marcus refused to look at me. Vanessa, however, turned and smirked her lips, mouthing silently, "This is ours." But when Denise stood and began to speak, her voice carried the weight of decades. She presented the HELOC papers, pointing to the uneven slant of the forged signature. She showed the bank transfers, the gambling apps, the red-stamped delinquency notices. And then she pressed play on my phone, recording the late-night threats outside my apartment, Marcus's voice seething, Vanessa's shrill taunts. The courtroom fell silent, the sound echoing against the high ceilings. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back tight, leaned forward on her bench. "Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson, is this your voice?" Vanessa stammered. Marcus flushed red, shifting in his seat. Their denial crumbled brick by brick as the evidence stacked higher. When the session adjourned, the judge announced, "This court finds sufficient cause to proceed with partition by sale. An appraiser will be appointed and the property will be listed for sale under court supervision. All parties are ordered to cooperate." The gavel struck wood, sharp and final. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years: vindication. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the sound of the law shifting in my favor. As I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, the autumn wind brushing against my face, I thought of Henry, of his calloused hands laying tile in the kitchen, whispering about foundations. I whispered back into the wind, "It's standing, Henry. It's still standing." It started with silence. After the gavel fell and the judge ordered the appraisal, I didn't hear from Marcus or Vanessa for 3 days. No calls, no knocks on my door, no smug texts, just silence. And then, like a dam breaking, the voicemails came. The first one landed on a Tuesday evening as I was setting down a plate of beans and cornbread. Marcus's voice burst from the phone, hot with fury. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? Do you understand what you've done to us? You're ruining your own family." Vanessa's embarrassed, the neighbors are talking. "Drop this case. End it now or don't bother calling yourself my mother anymore." I pressed save and went back to my dinner. The next message came an hour later, his tone colder, quieter. "You want to play hardball, fine, but you don't know what you're dealing with. Vanessa has friends, people who know how to make life hard. You think the court will protect you forever? Think again." I saved that one too, my hands steady. Threats dressed as warnings, classic Marcus. By Thursday, the anger had shifted into something else. His voice cracked as he left the next voicemail. "Mom, Vanessa's pregnant. We were going to tell you after the holidays. Do you want your grandchild born into this mess? Please think about what you're doing. You don't have to destroy everything." I sat with that message for a long time, staring out the window at the magnolia tree swaying in the wind across the street. The tug at my heart was real. But so was the knowledge that Vanessa had lied before about money, about debts, about everything. Pregnancy or not, a foundation built on lies collapses sooner or later. Friday night, another voicemail, Vanessa's voice this time sharp but trembling. Gloria, listen. We can work something out. Forget the sale. We'll make the payments, I promise. Just call the lawyer, tell her to withdraw. Please. We can fix this. I closed my eyes, hearing the edge of desperation in her tone. The woman who once smirked in my face was now begging into my voicemail. But I remembered Denise's words, evidence never blinks. And these calls, these recordings were as valuable as any bank statement. Proof that their confidence was cracking. By Sunday morning, Marcus's voice had gone soft, almost childlike. Mom, I messed up. I know I did, but please don't take the house. It's all we have. I can change, I swear. Just don't do this. For a moment, I almost heard the little boy, he used to be the one who clung to my hand, walking into kindergarten. But then I remembered the porch, his voice cold, telling me to leave or he'd call the police. I remembered the forged signature, the gambling apps, the laughter as they shoved me aside. I hit save, all of them saved. That night, I sat in my small kitchen, the glow of the voicemail screen lighting my face, and I whispered into the quiet, I hear you, Marcus. I hear every word, and the court will hear them too. The calls didn't stop, but the balance had shifted. They weren't threats anymore. They were confessions. And with every saved message, my foundation grew stronger, brick by brick, ready for the storm still to come. 2 weeks later, a court-appointed appraiser arrived at the house on Magnolia Drive, clipboard in hand tape measure swinging from his belt. His name was Mr. Dalton, a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of steady eyes that had seen every trick in the book. I didn't need to be there, but I went anyway. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, the official inspection that would turn decades of sacrifice and months of betrayal into hard numbers. Marcus and Vanessa trailed behind Mr. Dalton as he moved from room to room. Vanessa muttered under her breath, her arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked painful. Marcus tried to argue about every note the man made. The roof doesn't need replacing, it just leaks a little when it rains hard. That's normal. Dalton didn't look up, only scribbled roof repair needed. When Dalton tapped at a crack in the drywall by the stairs, Vanessa snapped, That's cosmetic. You can't dock us for that. He raised one eyebrow and kept writing, settling cracks moderate. I followed silently, my eyes lingering on each corner of the house Henry had touched with his hands. The kitchen tiles he laid one summer, now scuffed but strong. The porch he built, now warped under Marcus's neglect. Every note Dalton made felt like a verdict, not just on the house, but on the care, or lack of it, given to the foundation Henry and I had poured ourselves into. After 2 hours, Dalton closed his clipboard and said, I'll submit the report to the court within 3 days. But from what I've seen, fair market value is about $399,000 to $405,000. Vanessa's mouth fell open. That's too low. Houses around here sell for more. Dalton's tone was flat, unmoved. Not with a roof like this, ma'am. 3 days later, Denise called me. Appraisal came in at $402,000. The judge-approved listing. Brenda's already lined up buyers. Brenda's voice followed on the next call, brisk but warm. Gloria, we've got serious interest. One buyer's offering cash $385,000 as is. No contingencies. That's strong. I sat at my kitchen table, calculator in hand, old habits returning. Sale price $385,000. Subtract. HELOC $74,000, unpaid debts, closing costs. Net proceeds about $180,000. My share after division, enough to breathe again. Enough to prove that truth still paid, even when betrayal tried to bury it. When Brenda walked me through the net sheet, Vanessa stormed into the office, voice sharp enough to cut glass. You can't sell our home to some stranger. We have rights. Brenda didn't flinch. You do. And the court has determined how those rights are exercised, through a partition by sale. The offer is fair. If you refuse, the judge can enforce. Marcus sagged in his chair, eyes dark, shoulders slumped. For once, he didn't speak. Vanessa ranted about being victims, about me destroying their lives, about neighbors gossiping. But the papers on the desk said otherwise. Papers don't lie. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, thinking about the number $180,000. It wasn't just money. It was vindication. Proof that all those years clipping coupons, balancing ledgers, and patching roofs with Henry hadn't been erased by arrogance or gambling apps. The next morning, I stood outside the house as Brenda placed the under contract sign in the yard. The magnolia tree swayed in the wind, its blossoms heavy and fragrant, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. Marcus stood on the porch, his eyes red, watching silently. Vanessa paced behind him, spitting curses under her breath, but I didn't look away. I let the wind carry Henry's voice back to me steady and strong. "Don't let go of the house, Gloria. It's our foundation." And I whispered, "The foundation stands, Henry, even if the house doesn't." The move-out notice came down like the last toll of a bell. The court gave Marcus and Vanessa 30 days to vacate. For a while, they pretended it wasn't real boxes, sat unopened curtains still hanging the yard, still cluttered with Vanessa's patio furniture. But deadlines do not care about denial, and soon the day arrived when their time ran out. I pulled up in Brenda's car, her steady presence beside me as moral support. The driveway was chaos. A rented U-Haul truck sat half-filled, Marcus sweating as he hauled boxes, his shirt stained with frustration. Vanessa stood on the porch, screaming into her phone about unfair judges and corrupt systems. Every few minutes she turned to glare at me, her face red with fury. When she spotted me, her voice rose to a shriek. "Are you happy now, Gloria? You ruined your own son's life. You destroyed this family." I kept my voice level calm. "I didn't destroy it, Vanessa. You did the moment you gambled away what was never yours to risk." Marcus froze a box in his hands. For a flicker of a second, I thought he might drop it and walk over to me, might say the words I had waited months, years to hear. But then his face hardened again. He stomped down the driveway and shoved the box into the truck. Neighbors gathered at their mailboxes, some shaking their heads, others whispering. The spectacle had become public, and no amount of Vanessa's shouting could change the truth written in court orders and appraisal reports. Inside the house felt hollow, the furniture gone, the walls bare, every footstep echoing off stripped floors. I walked through each room one last time with Brenda clipboard in hand, documenting condition before closing. In the kitchen, I ran my fingers over the tile Henry had laid chipped now, but still holding firm. In the living room, the indentations in the carpet marked where our old sofa once sat, where Marcus had sprawled as a boy, watching Saturday cartoons. Memories lingered like shadows, but the warmth had been drained away long before today. At the dining room window, Marcus finally spoke. His voice was low-tired. "Mom, was it worth it?" I turned, meeting his eyes. Was 30 years of sacrifice worth protecting? Yes. Was it worth watching you throw it away? No. But I won't apologize for saving what's left. His jaw tightened and he looked away. Vanessa stormed past him, muttering, "She'll die alone with her papers. Mark my words." I let her words hang in the air, meaningless compared to the thick packet Brenda placed on the table, the closing papers. The final act. My hand didn't tremble as I signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like sealing not just the sale, but the boundaries I had drawn lines. No threat, no guilt, no manipulation could cross again. When the last signature dried, Brenda slid the check across the table. $180,000. Clean, untouchable, mine. I pressed my palm over it, closing my eyes for a moment. I thought of Henry, of the nights patching roofs of beans and rice dinners, of the years I carried more than my share, so Marcus could stand tall. I thought of the boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story, the son who now stood outside refusing to meet my eyes. And I thought of the foundation, battered but unbroken. As we walked out, the mover slammed the U-Haul door shut. Vanessa cursed, her voice shrill and empty. Marcus stood with his hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He didn't speak again. Neither did I. Some silences are stronger than words. That evening, back in my apartment, I laid the check on the kitchen table. The late sun slanted across it, turning the numbers into gold. My hands trembled, but not with fear this time, with release. With finality. "This is my foundation standing," I whispered into the quiet. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. The house on Magnolia Drive is no longer mine. The magnolia tree still sways there, blossoms still bloom, but the weight of betrayal no longer hangs over me. I walk past it sometimes on my way to the market or to church, and I feel something unexpected. Not grief, not loss, but relief. The foundation Henry and I built did not crumble. It simply shifted. The equity, the justice, the truth, it came with me. Marcus and Vanessa moved away shortly after the sale. I hear whispers that Vanessa still owes money that the gambling never stopped. I don't ask, I don't chase. My boundary is set. Marcus knows where I live, knows my number, but silence is its own answer. For the first time, I don't rush to fix what he broke. That is his burden to carry. With the settlement, I established a small trust in Henry's name, a scholarship fund for local students studying accounting, a way to turn 30 years of sacrifice into something more than just survival, a way to remind myself that family is not always about blood, it's about legacy, integrity, and the courage to hold a line when no one else will. If you've watched this far, I want to ask you, have you ever had to set a hard boundary with family to protect what you've built? Tell me your story in the comments I'll be reading. And if you believe, like I do, that foundations matter, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the strongest love is the one that refuses to let betrayal win.